Welcome back to Outlaw Operations, where every story drags you deeper into the shadows. Tonight, we unravel a twisted tale of lies, greed, and betrayal, a journey that began with love and ambition but ended in heartbreak. Huge thanks to all our amazing subscribers and every one of you watching right now. Your support keeps this world alive. But here's a secret just for you: 88% of you are watching but haven't hit subscribe yet. So why stay on the sidelines? Join the Outlaw Operations family, smash that subscribe button and become part of the crew that's in the know, the ones who don't just watch the story, but live it. Get comfortable, this is one story you absolutely can't afford to miss. Dwayne never liked pressing people too hard about their pasts. Everyone had scars. Everyone had secrets. And Tasha? She had that look in her eyes, the kind that said some wounds were still bleeding beneath the surface. Out of respect, and maybe a little fear of triggering something painful, he never pushed her for details. But the cracks began to show. At first, it was little things. A story here and there that didn't quite line up. Tasha would mention how her grandfather was a federal judge, a powerful man who died in a bizarre battery explosion. She said she was meant to inherit a significant fortune. But no money ever came. And when Dwayne, out of curiosity, tried to verify the details online, he found nothing. No judge. No explosion. Not even a whisper of that tragedy in any records. It should have been big news, yet it didn't exist. Living together only magnified the unease. Tasha often spun tales about her life, grand, tragic, strange stories. Too strange. Dwayne's instincts kicked in. He wasn't the jealous or suspicious type, but something in his gut told him to dig deeper. That's when he discovered Mitch Kemp. Tasha's first husband. Or at least, the first one Dwayne could find. But Mitch wasn't the only one. Before she turned 31, she had already been married 5 times. 5. And each relationship left behind nothing but shadows. It struck Dwayne as not just unusual, it was chilling. He tried to ask her about Mitch. She hesitated, then finally told him the marriage was a mistake. She claimed they were never really in love. Said he was Lex's biological father, but little else. Mitch, she insisted, had vanished from her life, and she hadn't tried to find him. That apathy, it bothered Dwayne. Who doesn't want to know where the father of their child is? So Dwayne looked harder. Mitch seemed to have evaporated, no digital footprint, no social records, nothing. It was like he never existed. Dwayne's concern deepened into obsession. Eventually, he tracked down one of Tasha's exes, a man named Jones. They met in a small, dimly lit diner outside the city. Jones looked older than his years, worn by something heavier than time. Over greasy eggs and stale coffee, Jones opened up. He said Tasha had always been secretive. Prone to lies. One night, she drank too much and told him something that still haunted him. According to her drunken confession, Mitch had done something unforgivable: he had raped her daughter. Dwayne's blood went cold. The room seemed to tilt around him. Tasha hadn't gone to the police. Instead, she told her then-husband Greg Morton. And Greg, he hadn't taken it well. Jones said they made a decision, one that twisted Dwayne's stomach. They decided Mitch didn't deserve a trial. They would handle it themselves. The plan was cold. Calculated. Tasha lured Mitch to her new home under the pretense of reconnecting. Greg was waiting there, gun in hand. Mitch never made it out. According to Tasha's drunken tale, Greg shot him, multiple times, straight through the heart. Jones admitted he never believed her. Thought she was spinning another one of her wild, alcohol-fueled stories. That's why he never went to the police. But Dwayne, he couldn't shake the feeling that this time, it was real. He tried to find Mitch again. Nothing. No phone number. No social media. No news. Just a void. And the more he searched, the deeper the silence grew. Lex's birth certificate bore Mitch's last name, Kemp, confirming he existed once. But now, it was like the earth had swallowed him. Still, Dwayne stayed. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was fear. Maybe he just wanted his son to have a mother. Tasha was so gentle with Lex. So loving. It made the idea of her being capable of murder seem absurd. Ridiculous, even. He buried the suspicion. Then he found out she was cheating on him. The betrayal shattered whatever illusions he still held. He kicked her out. But the hurt didn't stop the itch for truth. He dove back into her past, combing through old messages, online profiles, anything that might hold answers. Her MySpace account, dusty and forgotten, was filled with unread messages. People were looking for her. People who claimed to know Mitch. People who wanted to know where she had gone. Some messages were from Mitch's relatives. They said he'd been missing for 4 years. They had been searching. Hoping. Asking questions that no one seemed willing to answer. That was the push Dwayne needed. He returned to the puzzle with fresh eyes. Mitch's disappearance. The birth certificate. The drunken confession. The ex-husbands. The inconsistent stories. One by one, the pieces slid into place, forming a picture he didn't want to see. Still, no body. No crime scene. Just suspicions. Whispers. Desperate, he went to the Marin Police Department. He sat with the sheriff, laid it all out, everything he had uncovered, every dark detail. The sheriff listened closely, especially when Dwayne mentioned Mitch Kemp. Something shifted in the air. The police agreed to quietly open a case. They asked Dwayne to keep silent, not to tip off Tasha. This was a small town. The idea that a citizen could piece together the fragments of an old, hidden crime using nothing but memory and the internet, it shook them. Dwayne wasn't a detective, but he had an uncanny ability to thread timelines, trace motives, find patterns. The officers were impressed. But even with Dwayne's groundwork, they had to build the case from scratch. They interviewed Jones. He told the same story again, word for word, but this time it was recorded. They reached out to Mitch's family in Boone County, Missouri. The relatives were emotional, relieved someone was finally listening. They always suspected Tasha had something to do with his disappearance. Back then, Tasha was just 26. Mitch was older by more than a decade. At first, it was a whirlwind romance. She was beautiful. Mysterious. Everyone thought Mitch was lucky. But the magic faded quickly. Tasha became controlling, isolating Mitch from friends and family. He changed. Withered. Then vanished. Some said she manipulated him. Others believed he ran. But now, with this new information, the whispers began to take shape, no longer fantasy, but something darker. Something real. Even as the police moved quietly through their investigation, Tasha lived her life like nothing had happened. Smiling. Laughing. Telling more stories. But Dwayne watched her differently now. Every laugh sounded hollow. Every glance, suspicious. He wondered how many others she had lied to. How many had believed her. And how many had disappeared. In the quiet hours of the night, Dwayne would sometimes hear Lex cry out in his sleep. He never asked what the boy dreamed about. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. Because sometimes, when he looked into Tasha's past, he felt like he was staring into a grave. And something inside told him that grave wasn't empty. Not anymore. Mitch Kemp had always been the kind of man who wore patience like a second skin. Even when Tasha's moods shifted like storm clouds, when her sharp words cut deeper than she realized, or maybe deeper than she cared, he absorbed it all. Quietly. Kindly. He never fought back, never shouted, never slammed the door. And maybe that's what made him the perfect target. Someone like Tasha knew how to twist softness into submission. She didn't push him away. Instead, she kept him close enough to use, far enough to blame. In 2002, a child was born, a little girl who unknowingly tied them tighter together. The couple married not long after, as if a wedding band could fix what was already broken. But reality has a way of mocking delusions. Bills piled up, arguments worsened, and love turned to something brittle and cold. 8 months into their fragile union, it crumbled. Tasha walked out with her daughter, her eyes already scanning the horizon for someone new. She didn't want to raise a child alone. Enter Greg Morton. He was quiet, clean-cut, the type who smiled but never blinked. Tasha met him before the ink on her divorce papers had even dried. By the time the legal ties to Mitch were severed, she was already living with Greg. And in just 6 months, they were married. Quick, convenient, maybe even strategic. Mitch wasn't ready to let go. He loved Tasha, or maybe the memory of her before everything soured. He wanted another chance. But when she shut him down with the cold finality of a slammed door, he turned his energy towards something else, his daughter. He filed for joint custody. When Tasha heard about it, she snapped. Mitch said he was considering full custody now, and that broke something in her. She lashed out. Literally. He told his brother about their meeting, how she had spat at him, how her palm had met his cheek with venom behind it. 2 weeks later, Mitch was gone. No goodbye, no note, no signs of a struggle. He vanished into the kind of silence that screams. His brother called Tasha, again and again, but she gave nothing. Claimed she didn't know anything. Then she stopped answering altogether. The phone calls went dead. The worry grew louder. And quietly, she continued to pay her bills using Mitch's bank account. She lived her life like nothing had happened, as if a man hadn't disappeared from the face of the earth. The Boone County Sheriff's Department launched a search, but Mitch had disappeared so cleanly it was like he'd been erased. There was no blood, no body, no weapon. Just an absence. The investigation eventually cooled, then stalled, then faded. For 4 years, Mitch was a ghost, haunting the memories of the people who loved him and the woman who claimed not to know what happened. Then, in 2008, something cracked. Dwayne came forward. He had a story, one that painted a picture of murder. The police had long suspected Mitch was dead, but without a body, they had nothing but shadows. They needed someone to confess. Someone to talk. And there was only one person who might know where the truth was buried. Tasha. They tracked her down, invited her in under the guise of routine questioning. She showed up willingly, composed, seemingly cooperative. She didn't know they already had part of the truth. She told the detective she wasn't surprised Mitch had disappeared. He was a troubled man, she said, maybe someone had it out for him. Revenge wasn't out of the question, she mused. When asked about Greg, she waved him off. Said she hadn't seen him in years, didn't even know where he was now. But her calm didn't match her eyes. The detectives kept digging. As they chipped away at her polished surface, a darker version of Greg began to emerge. The mild-mannered man she once described became someone else, angry, possessive, prone to outbursts. She started to shift blame subtly, carefully. Then, finally, she cracked. She told them what happened, or at least her version. Mitch came over that August afternoon to talk about custody. Tasha wasn't home. Greg was. Words turned into shouting, shouting turned into a fight. And then Greg pulled a gun. According to Tasha, he shot Mitch multiple times, cold, precise, lethal. She insisted she hadn't been involved, hadn't asked for it, hadn't wanted it. She said Greg confessed to her after the fact, described every gruesome detail. She was horrified, she claimed. But the police weren't buying the Innocence Act. Especially after Jones, another piece of the puzzle, recalled that Tasha had lured Mitch to meet Greg that day. That she knew what was going to happen. That she might have been more than just a witness after the fact. Still, without a body, the case was paper-thin. They needed to find Mitch. Tasha agreed to go back to Missouri, to the old farm where she believed Greg had buried the body. The land had changed, new owners, new buildings, a new layer of life trying to grow over something dead. Tasha wandered through the property, eyes scanning the earth like she was trying to remember a dream. She pointed to a spot near where the house used to be. The search team dug. And dug. And dug. Nothing. Not a bone. Not a shoe. Not a memory. Weeks passed. The land was scarred from the excavation, but Mitch stayed hidden. When they questioned her again, more aggressively this time, Tasha finally remembered something, conveniently, suspiciously. She said Greg had dug a hole. A deep one. Near the barn, maybe. Or maybe the tree line. It was all so fuzzy now, she said. The horror of it all wasn't just in the murder. It was in the waiting. In the not knowing. In the idea that someone could be buried under your feet while a new life is being built over them. The farm was quiet again. But not peaceful. The kind of silence it held now wasn't empty, it was full. Heavy. Watching. And Mitch. He never came home. The air was damp the day she spoke up. Tasha's eyes stayed fixed on the floor, barely lifting her gaze when she muttered the words, "I can show you where he is." Nobody in that cramped interrogation room expected her to say it. She hadn't spoken much until then. But once the name, Mitch, floated back into the room, the silence turned sharp. The officers gave her a map. Her fingers shook as she hovered over it, then tapped a spot near the edge of an old rural farm property, forgotten land, the kind swallowed by weeds and whispers. They marked it, not knowing if it was another dead lead. It wasn't. 30 minutes after the first shovel hit dirt, a thin sheet of blue plastic peeked through the soil. The digging stopped. Officers looked at each other. Gloves on. Cameras rolling. They pulled up a tarp, inside, the decomposing body of a man. Cold, limp, and alone in the earth. The body was confirmed to be Mitch Kemp, the man who had vanished without a trace almost 6 years prior. His disappearance had become nothing more than a rumor, a sad anecdote in a town with too many stories. But now he was here. Found. Silent. The forensics team did their work quickly. 6 bullets. All to the chest. Point blank. He never stood a chance. By the time the coroner zipped up the body bag, the police already had someone in their sights. Greg Morton was arrested in St. Louis just 3 weeks later. The man had been living quietly, or at least trying to. His name wasn't a surprise, it had lingered in the background for a while. But this time, they had a body. They had Tasha pointing fingers. And they had motive, though not enough to make it clean. Police believed Greg hadn't acted alone. They were convinced Tasha was in it too. She had led them to the body, yes, but maybe not out of guilt. Maybe out of fear. Or calculation. Greg, locked behind bars, didn't speak. Not a word. Not about Tasha, not about Mitch. Just a cold stare through glass. Weeks turned into months. Still, nothing. They thought time would loosen his lips. But the man was stone. Tasha, on the other hand, started to unravel. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe it was the guilt. Or maybe something darker was haunting her. She changed her story. Not once. Not twice. But more than the police could count. The version she finally settled on painted a twisted picture. She had invited Mitch to the farm to give him some photos of their daughter. Lexi. She claimed there was no trap, no plan. Just a meeting. A conversation. A moment of peace between two broken people. But Greg found them. She said he stormed in with a gun, fury in his eyes, jealousy leaking through his voice. She hadn't expected him. Before she could react, he raised the gun and fired. 6 times. The noise must have echoed across the fields like thunder from a black sky. She said Greg blamed her afterward. Pinned her to a wall. Called her a whore. A traitor. A liar. She wanted to call the cops, but Mitch was already gone. And Greg? He told her to keep quiet. He made sure she knew what would happen if she didn't. What the police couldn't understand, what chilled them, was that Tasha continued to live with Greg for a year and a half after the killing. They shared dinners. Beds. Air. As if the ground hadn't swallowed a man between them. As if they weren't haunted by blood. When asked why, she said she feared him. Said if she tried to leave, she might end up buried in that same hole. It was the kind of fear that crawled into your spine and made you forget how to scream. Then, the twist. Greg finally broke his silence. The timing wasn't lost on anyone. 3 weeks after Tasha's arrest. He gave the police a version of events that was colder. More calculated. According to Greg, he pulled the trigger, yes, but it wasn't his idea. He claimed Tasha told him Mitch had raped her. Told him to make it right. Told him that revenge was the only way. He said he wouldn't have done it if she hadn't pushed. That he was just the gun. She was the finger. Tasha denied it all. Said Greg was lying to get a lighter sentence. That he was twisting the truth, like he always had. By the time it went to trial in June 2010, 6 years had passed since Mitch's disappearance. The courtroom felt like a mausoleum. Mitch's mother clutched a photo of her son with one hand and a crucifix with the other. Tasha sat, calm, dressed in gray. She didn't look like a killer. But that's the thing about evil, it rarely looks like you expect. Her lawyers painted her as a victim. Said she was trapped. That Greg was a monster who ruled her with threats and fists. That she never wanted Mitch dead. Greg's lawyers threw her under the bus. Said she planned it all. That she manipulated her second husband to kill her first. That she wanted to win the custody battle by ending it, permanently. One neighbor testified. Said Greg was domineering. That Tasha had to ask permission to leave the house. To eat. To breathe. Said it was clear she feared him. That she couldn't have manipulated him if she tried. But then came another witness, Tasha's ex-husband, Jones. He said something different. Claimed that, one night while drunk, Tasha told him the whole plan. That she had invited Mitch to the farm knowing he wouldn't leave it. Tasha said Jones made it up. Said Greg must have fed him that lie. That they were all trying to bury her the same way they buried Mitch. Hours of interrogation footage played for the jury. Tasha looked cooperative. Her lawyer reminded them, if she was guilty, why would she have led police to the body? But the prosecution pointed to her ever-changing story. Her inconsistencies. Her secrets. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Gasps. Silence. A sharp, hollow cry from Mitch's sister. Tasha's face fell, frozen in disbelief. Life in prison. No parole. Greg, meanwhile, had taken a deal. 19 years for second-degree murder. Tasha's lawyers called it betrayal. Said he sold her out to save himself. But the damage was done. She tried to appeal. Failed. The courtroom closed. The media left. The town moved on. But that piece of land, that cursed patch of dirt, it never forgets. And when the wind howls across it at night, locals say it carries a whisper. Low. Sad. Terrified. Like someone begging for their life. They said she was a monster, a danger, a woman lost in the blur between madness and cruelty. But those who had known her before the news reports, before the courtroom sketches, before the blood, some still struggled to understand how Julisa, broken as she was, could spiral into something so horrifying. Her story began like so many others, a hard childhood, a young life riddled with pain, confusion, and invisible demons. By 13, Julisa had already begun her descent. There were hospital stays, psychiatric evaluations, detox clinics. She was in and out of institutions, lost in a haze of pills and substances that numbed more than they healed. Her parents fought with her constantly, sometimes screaming, sometimes crying, and eventually, she started to run. She ran from school, from home, from every sliver of normalcy that tried to reach her. Still, life didn't stop moving. At 22, she became a mother. The baby's name was Eli. December 15, 2015, he arrived full-term but fragile, diagnosed shortly after birth with Townes-Brocks syndrome. It was a rare genetic disorder that left him needing surgery after surgery. He wore a hearing aid, had mobility issues, kidney problems, and yet, he was a remarkably bright child. Happy. Sociable. He'd giggle when the wind hit his face just right. He'd hum nonsense songs and wave at strangers like he knew their secrets. Tori, Eli's father, tried to stay present. But the relationship with Julisa collapsed under the weight of their reality. She moved back in with her mother for a time, though things weren't much better there. As Eli grew, so did Julisa's instability. By 2017, the Department of Child Services in Minnesota had begun watching closely. Eli wasn't getting his medications on time. Doctor appointments were missed. The house was unkempt. She was accused, quietly at first, of neglect. Then the whispers grew louder. In 2019, something snapped again. Julisa accused Tori of threatening to blow her up in her car. The story unraveled fast. Investigators found no truth in it. It turned out to be a delusion, the product of a psychotic break, an invented tale, one born out of her growing fear of losing control over Eli. Tori, despite everything, loved his son fiercely. He kept trying, kept pushing to be involved. He went to court. He presented evidence. He begged them to see that Julisa wasn't well enough. Social workers visited the home in October 2020. The boy wore only pajamas during the day. The place was a mess. The bathroom flooded, the fridge nearly empty, a sour smell clinging to the walls. Still, Julisa held on to custody, just barely. When things got worse, she was evicted. Her mental health deteriorated again. She relapsed. Her grip on reality loosened further. Eli, the little boy with the bright eyes, began to change too. He'd kick other children. Shove them without reason. He chewed on his clothes obsessively, babbled in baby talk even though he was well past that age, and a stutter developed that hadn't been there before. Tori brought it to the court again. He had to. He was scared. His son, once so vibrant, was dimming before his eyes. Julisa missed drug tests. Her blood came back positive for illegal substances. Someone suspected she had shown Eli disturbing videos. No one could prove it, but there were murmurs, little details that made the skin crawl. One time, during a hike, she dropped a tumbler off a steep edge. Instead of leaving it behind, she left her son, her sick, small, fragile son, alone at the top of the mountain while she climbed down to retrieve a cup. A cup. The social worker who heard about it flagged it, concerned she wasn't mentally fit to assess risk. But somehow, despite all of it, Julisa still had a chance. Some voices in the system believed she was capable of recovery, that she could be a mother again. She refused therapy. She drove recklessly. She spiraled more quietly, but more dangerously. Yet the court didn't see enough cause to take her son away. On May 10, 2022, she was given full custody again. 10 days later, the nightmare began. It was early, around 7 a.m., on May 20th when a 911 call came through. A silver car was driving erratically, scraping along the road without tires. Officers responded, expecting maybe a stolen vehicle or a driver high out of their mind. What they found was Julisa. She looked haunted. Her clothes were torn, stained with dark red. Her hands, her face, blood. Her story was strange. She said the blood was from deer meat a butcher had given her. She said it got on her accidentally. But there was something in her voice, in her eyes, that made the officers uneasy. Inside the car, near the armrest, something caught an officer's eye. Flesh. Or what looked like it. She said it was animal meat. Just deer. But it didn't look like deer. They asked her to sit in the patrol car while they ran her information. She became agitated. Her movements were sharp, twitchy. She muttered to herself. Officers confirmed there were no outstanding warrants. No immediate legal reasons to detain her. And yet, something wasn't right. The car smelled wrong. Like rust and rot. Something old and sickly sweet. They searched it further. That was when they found him. Eli's small, lifeless body was in the trunk. Cold. Quiet. Wrapped in a blanket that had once been his favorite, covered in tiny stars. There were signs of trauma. Bruising. Internal injuries. His eyes were closed like he'd gone to sleep afraid. His face, frozen in a final, silent plea. Julisa didn't speak after that. Not to the officers. Not to the doctors. Not even during the trial. She simply stared. Sometimes at the floor. Sometimes at the sky. But never at the people. The courtroom was packed with reporters, attorneys, strangers who couldn't look away from the tragedy. She pleaded not guilty. Blamed the government. The agencies. The system that had failed her. She said they never helped her. She said the demons weren't hers, they were given to her. But no one could explain what she'd done to Eli. Not really. The jury returned a verdict of guilty. The judge sentenced her to life in prison. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She simply nodded. Some say she went mad a long time ago. Others believe she knew exactly what she was doing. And Eli, the boy with the hearing aid and the soft smile, became another ghost in a country full of silent children, lost not to strangers, but to their own blood. The car pulled up outside a quiet suburban home, the headlights briefly illuminating the cracked walkway and withering bushes. Julisa stepped out slowly, eyes hollow, lips slightly parted like she was trying to remember how to breathe. She thanked the officers who drove her home, unaware that her vehicle, still idling behind, was about to become a crime scene. They told her they needed to take the car in for routine inspection. She nodded, barely hearing them. The night was cold, and her hands trembled, not just from the chill. In the fluorescent-lit garage of the precinct, officers opened the trunk. The scent hit first, metallic, thick. One officer gagged. Then came the discovery. A child-sized blanket soaked through in dark, dried blood, its weight unnatural. Beneath it, the pale and lifeless body of a young boy. Tucked beside him was a pistol. Cold. Loaded. Recently fired. There was a bullet hole in the armrest of the passenger seat. Small, clean, surgical. Like someone had tried to hide the chaos behind precision. Officers raced back to Julisa's home. But it was too late. Security footage from a neighboring house caught her walking away just minutes before they arrived. She wasn't alone. A man walked beside her, tall, familiar in his stance, not hurried but not calm either. Their steps were in sync, like two people bound by a secret. An apartment was located hours later. Inside, Julisa sat on the bathroom floor, scrubbing crimson from her jeans under a weak faucet stream. The water turned pink, then clear, then pink again. She barely looked up when they broke down the door. Her eyes were somewhere else. Somewhere far darker. She was arrested without resistance. Booked into the Hennepin County Jail. The news report skipped over the small details, the way her hands shook, how her eyes avoided the mirror. But jail doesn't leave you alone. And it didn't leave her untouched. Her mental state began to crumble. Conversations became disconnected. She cried without knowing why. Some days she screamed at walls. The investigation dragged. Her son, Eli, was only 6. A bright-eyed child with dimples and a soft laugh that echoed like music in quiet rooms. He had been sitting in the back seat when 9 bullets ripped through the fabric of that day. The forensic report said he never stood a chance. Tori, the boy's father, collapsed when he was told. His grief was too large for his chest. But what broke him more than the murder was the history behind it. He had begged, pleaded, with child protection workers not to give custody back to Julisa. She wasn't well. She had made wild accusations about him, ones the court didn't fully believe but accepted just enough to grant her full custody again. Tori had watched his son fade from his life, helpless against the system. And now, there was nothing left of Eli but photographs and an empty car seat with a hole in the center. Julisa had been unraveling for months. Her mental health deteriorated rapidly after regaining custody. She stopped showing up for work. Her social media painted a mask of perfection, Aquarius. Mother. Lawyer. Feminist. Police officer. But behind the hashtags and filtered photos was a spiraling mind. Evidence poured in. Security footage showed her purchasing a handgun and ammunition. She left her apartment one morning with something wrapped in a gray blanket. That same blanket, stained and heavy, was found with her son's body. At a gas station, cameras caught her trying to wash blood off her fingers. On her phone, police found disturbing searches. How much blood can a 6-year-old lose? Can gunpowder residue be washed off? How to dispose of blood-stained clothes? And then there was the insurance policy. $400,000. That's what she asked for on her son's life. But the maximum coverage was $50,000. Still, she insisted. Pleaded. Pushed. The bank employees remembered her as strangely persuasive, oddly calm. Her obsession with weapons had grown suddenly. A friend said she began visiting the shooting range, carrying the handgun in a gray blanket. The same friend noticed she became distant, distracted, her voice always a few steps behind her thoughts. The day of the murder, Julisa told Robert, her boyfriend, she was taking Eli to school. He believed her. Why wouldn't he? Eli was just a sweet kid. Curious. Polite. Robert said they got along fine. But she never took him to school. Instead, she drove down a secluded road, parked beneath a dying maple tree, and did something no mother should ever be able to do. 9 shots. She drove back with the body in the trunk. During the trial, Robert testified. He said Julisa was quiet that morning. Too quiet. He didn't see it coming. No one did. The prosecution painted her as methodical, disturbed but conscious. A woman who planned the death of her own child. They said she did it for money. For revenge. Or maybe just to end her own pain. Julisa denied it all. Even as the jury read the verdict, guilty of first-degree murder, she sat in silence. Then leaned back. Then looked down at the floor. Her final words in the courtroom weren't apologies. They were insults. A bitter, disjointed outburst toward the judge, the system, the people who tried to understand her and failed. She was sentenced to life without parole. She was 28. After the trial, Tori filed a lawsuit against the county's child protection services. He believed they played a role in Eli's death. They had given custody to a woman with known mental health issues. They ignored his warnings. That lawsuit would be heard in 2024. And yet, none of that could bring Eli back. The horror wasn't just in the crime. It was in the days leading up to it. The red flags ignored. The cries for help unheard. The way love turned to silence and silence into murder. Eli's room remains untouched. His backpack still sits by the door. His toothbrush is still in the holder. There are nights when Tori swears he hears the soft sound of his son laughing, echoing through the hallways like a memory refusing to be forgotten. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and the lights are off, he swears he hears footsteps. Small. Familiar. Just passing by. But no one is ever there. The night air carried a damp chill, thick with the kind of silence that always comes just after a scream. Blue and red lights painted the crumbling concrete walls of the apartment block in eerie flickers, bathing everything in that surreal glow that signals something terrible has happened. Blood had already dried in places along the cracked walkway, its trail leading to the front steps. The scent of iron and antiseptic hovered, stubborn against the cold. Teresa Keel, 56, lay motionless as paramedics struggled to stabilize her. Her breaths came in rasps, barely audible under the hum of the stretcher wheels. Her face was swollen beyond recognition, and one eye looked like it had caved in. The dumbbell had done more than damage, it had mutilated. As she was lifted into the ambulance, a car screeched to a halt nearby. Vincent stumbled out. The sight before him made the blood drain from his face. Just hours earlier, he'd been laughing with his mother over roasted lamb and sweet tea. Now, she looked like someone else's tragedy. A neighbor, Franklin, approached. His voice was tight with urgency. She was attacked right here. Just a few minutes ago. I tried to stop him. I chased the bastard. Vincent couldn't respond. His mind was already unraveling. Officers worked quickly, combing the entryway of the apartment building. A jagged hole had been smashed into the stucco wall, evidence of a missed first strike. Teresa must have fought back. The scene suggested rage more than intent to steal. Her purse, phone, even her glasses, all left behind. This wasn't random. This was personal. Franklin, still breathing hard, gave his statement. The attacker, he said, was tall and powerful. Athletic. Wore a cap low over his eyes, and a bandage across one cheek like he'd been in another fight not long ago. Franklin had pursued the figure until he vanished between alley shadows. He was fast. Too fast. Maybe he had a car waiting. Search dogs caught nothing. The scent ended abruptly 3 blocks away. Near a cluster of trash bins behind Teresa's building, officers found it, blood on steel. A dumbbell, the kind used in home gyms. The handle was slick with fingerprints, still fresh. It was bagged and rushed to forensics. That night, the weight of it all settled like fog. The brutality. The timing. The purpose. Vincent sat alone in the emergency room, hands trembling, replaying dinner again and again. But one name kept whispering in the back of his mind, Francesca. She hadn't been seen in almost a year. Francesca Keel, Teresa's only daughter, had cut ties and vanished. She left home to live with Ralph Kepler, a man with a clean shave and dirty soul. 26, smooth-talking, a former athlete turned correctional officer. The kind of man who smiles too easily and stares too long. Francesca was just 18 when she met him. Teresa never approved. The arguments were constant. Threats, slammed doors, crying through bedroom walls. Francesca changed after Ralph came into her life. Cold. Isolated. Defiant. She stopped answering Vincent's calls. Stopped visiting. And eventually, stopped being Francesca. Vincent and their older brother, Michael, had warned her. Even begged. But love can be blind, and control can look like love if you're starved enough for it. Detectives tracked the couple down in Linwood. A two-story rental with drawn curtains and dead plants in the front yard. When questioned, Francesca seemed genuinely shocked. Her voice cracked. Her hands trembled. "We were here all night," she insisted. "Wrapping gifts. Watching the Cowboys game." She even pulled up a selfie. Smiling. Taken just 11 minutes after the attack. But detectives weren't convinced. Ralph backed up her story, but something in his eyes didn't sit right. Too steady. Too rehearsed. He claimed he'd only left once that day, just to buy a lottery ticket around 11 a.m. Then he'd been home the rest of the time. Still, no witnesses. No proof. Just grainy camera footage showing a tall figure, partially obscured, vanishing into the dark with a gym bag slung over one shoulder. Possibly containing bloodied clothes. The more detectives dug, the more twisted things became. Ralph wasn't just a boyfriend. He was an investor. A lawsuit surfaced, accusing Teresa and Vincent of defrauding several people, including Ralph himself, of more than $350,000 meant for a startup app project. Ralph claimed his $130,000 was siphoned off for Teresa's surgeries, luxury cars, even designer clothes. But the other investors had been refunded. Ralph hadn't. Why? Ralph painted Teresa as a manipulative woman who bled him dry. In private messages recovered by investigators, he wrote things like, "She deserves what's coming," and, "One day, her luck's gonna run out." Francesca, disturbingly, had replied with a laughing emoji. But perhaps most chilling were the messages between Teresa and her close friends. She said she felt watched. Unsafe. That Ralph was turning Francesca into someone she didn't recognize. That she feared he'd harm her. "If anything happens to me," she wrote once, "look at him first." Vincent read those words later, and they never left him. As detectives reviewed voice notes, calls, and texts, a pattern emerged. Ralph was controlling. Francesca's emails showed signs of being monitored. Her bank transactions, manipulated. Even her body wasn't off limits. There were receipts for implants, surgeries, expenses she couldn't afford alone. Allegations surfaced that Ralph pressured her into every change. Friends testified she seemed scared, always glancing over her shoulder. But still defended him. Teresa's body fought on in the ICU. Machines breathed for her. Her right eye, gone. Her brain, swollen. Skull fractured like a cracked shell. Doctors whispered that if she survived, she might not remember anything. Or worse, might not be herself anymore. But Vincent wasn't letting this go. The horror wasn't just in the brutality. It was in the silence that came after. In the stitched smiles. The staged alibis. The way Francesca laughed in that selfie like nothing had happened. Ralph's name was already on the lawsuit filed by Teresa's family. They accused him of more than theft. They accused him of emotional abuse. Of mind control. Of turning their daughter into a stranger, and possibly, an accomplice. What haunted everyone wasn't just the crime itself, it was the eerie sense that Teresa had seen it coming. That she had screamed into the void for help long before that dumbbell came crashing down. And nobody listened. Now, the only witness to the horror was locked in a coma. And the ones responsible were still smiling in photographs. Francesca sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the cracks crawling across the ceiling like veins. Outside, the December wind howled through the alleyways of Linwood, rattling loose shutters and carrying with it a creeping sense of unease. She had been accused, again. This time, the accusations clawed at her reputation like broken glass, manipulation, conspiracy, an act that reeked of madness. She denied them all, of course. Everything had been consensual, she claimed. A relationship gone sour, maybe. A misunderstanding. But the courtroom air had smelled of rot, and the judge, perhaps too eager to believe her calm demeanor, dismissed the case in 2017. Ralph had already started whispering new accusations by then. During the trial, he told anyone who would listen that Teresa and Vincent, his former friends, had taken a hefty sum from him under the guise of building a dating app, only to funnel the money into luxuries and lies. But the evidence was thin, hollow even. Vincent had shown emails, development updates, code screenshots. He was still working on the app. No fraud, no theft, just paranoia. Or so it seemed. But the paranoia didn't die. It evolved. Investigators began tracing phone records. Ralph's and Francesca's digital fingerprints were everywhere, but one number stuck out like a blade in moonlight. It was tied to a company called Spyatech, a place that sold GPS trackers and surveillance gear. A receipt, buried in Francesca's inbox, dated 2 weeks before the attack, confirmed it. She had bought a tracker. She knew where Teresa was at all times. Alerts pinged her email every time the older woman moved. It wasn't just knowledge. It was obsession. Ralph and Francesca both had access to the tracker, even knew when its batteries needed changing. Coordinated, precise. On December 4th, the night it all came undone, Francesca ordered a taxi. Not for herself. For Ralph. That was the thread detectives pulled. The taxi driver remembered the man well. Tall, tense, breathing like he was swallowing his heartbeat. He slid into the back seat hunched low, like shadows were chasing him. He asked to be dropped at the station. The ride should have cost $5. He handed over a 20 without a word and vanished into the night. Security footage from the station played back like a ghostly loop. The man matched Ralph's build. His clothes. His hurried, anxious gait. It wasn't enough to convict him, not yet. But it was enough to pull him into the storm. On January 24, 2018, Ralph was arrested. The charge, attempted murder, the weapon, a dumbbell. A brutal, personal tool. Not something used in a moment of panic, but in premeditated fury. 2 sets of DNA were found at the scene. One was unmistakably Teresa's. The other, unknown. Ralph refused to give a sample. Demanded a lawyer. The lawyer refused cooperation. But while Ralph was locked up, someone found a way. A covert swab. A toothbrush. A cigarette butt. It was enough. The DNA matched. Ralph posted bail, $50,000, and slipped back into house arrest. A cage without bars. But the walls were closing in. The police had already started turning their attention toward Francesca, and her story began to decay. Friends described a woman unraveling under Ralph's influence. He filled her head with venom. Told her that her family wanted her inheritance. That her mother, Teresa, was plotting against her. That she'd end up with nothing if she didn't act. She believed him. Or pretended to. Investigators had collected over 20 warrants. Phones, laptops, emails, nothing was off limits. And on Francesca's devices, darkness bloomed. Search history revealed chilling questions. How much pressure to fracture a skull? Does DNA stick to bloodied hair? How long does it take a coma patient to die? These weren't thoughts of innocence. These were blueprints. By November 2018, the final horror struck. Teresa, unconscious for nearly 2 years, was still clinging to life. Machines breathed for her. Nurses bathed her limp frame. Her family visited daily, hoping for a blink, a breath, a miracle. It never came. On November 10th, they made the decision. They turned off the machines. Teresa slipped away, finally free of the coma, and of the nightmare. With her death, everything changed. Attempted murder became murder. Second degree for Ralph. Unintentional for Francesca. But the weight of the charge didn't match the weight of what they had done. Ralph eventually admitted it. It was all calculated. On December 4th, Francesca had tracked Teresa to a local diner where she was laughing with Vincent over coffee and pancakes. Francesca watched from the sidewalk like a predator. When Teresa returned home, Ralph was already inside. The weapon waited for him. Francesca called the taxi. A getaway plan in motion. She then opened her phone and posted an old selfie, taken days earlier, staged, filtered, and saved in her cloud. An alibi built on pixels. A lie wrapped in a smile. It didn't matter anymore. The truth was louder. In late 2019, with the trial reopened and the evidence laid bare like bones in the forest, the prosecutors offered a deal. Ralph Kepler pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and aggravated murder. Life in prison. Parole in 22 years, if the ghosts let him rest. Francesca Keel accepted a plea for unintentional murder. 13 years. Maybe 9, if the years were kind. But kindness had long left this story. Just like Teresa. Now, their names are whispered in hushed tones in Linwood, spoken like curses. A daughter who stalked her mother with code and metal. A man who claimed love, then left behind blood. And a town that still wonders how it missed the signs. They had been planning their wedding with a dreamlike precision, every detail tailored to reflect the ideal life they were about to build. Somewhere in the midst of all that joy and preparation, Juko Knights, an old family friend who ran a humble auto repair shop, had slowly become a trusted figure in their lives. It was through casual chats over coffee and evenings filled with laughter that he came to know the more delicate, hidden aspects of their relationship. Beneath the glossy surface, things were far from perfect. Juko learned that David, the seemingly charismatic groom-to-be, held a darker, more controlling side behind closed doors. Dawn, soft-spoken and warm, bore the bruises of his personality not on her skin but in her silence. She turned to alcohol, at first a comfort, then a crutch. The early morning sips became routine. Bottles were stashed behind bookshelves, beneath the sink, under the bed, anywhere David wouldn't think to look. She wore a mask of composure during the day, but Juko noticed. He always noticed. It escalated. The kind of escalation that creeps like mold, quiet and dangerous. When Dawn could no longer trust her husband with her money, she turned to Juko once more. In whispered conversations, she gave him envelopes, cash she had tucked away like small pieces of escape. The last time she handed him any money was on October 18, 2009. She had saved over $1,000, a small fortune that symbolized freedom. Then, she vanished. That following Monday, Dawn didn't show up for work. Her car was still parked outside the house. Silent. Undisturbed. But Dawn was gone. Joe's stomach twisted with unease. He went to David, hoping for a rational answer, but what he got instead was a calm shrug. She left, David said. Needed space. Said she was going into alcohol withdrawal. The word sat wrong with Joe. Withdrawal didn't start with silence and secrecy. And Dawn wouldn't leave her car behind. Not in a town like theirs where public transport was nearly non-existent. If she had truly left, where had she gone? Her phone was off. Her things were untouched. Days passed. Joe's unease festered into suspicion. He started watching David more closely. That's when he noticed Katie Galvin, a waitress who used to work for David at his restaurant. She wasn't just a former employee. She was always around. Too close. Too familiar. Her glances lingered. Her laughter came too easily. Joe realized Katie wasn't just working for David anymore, she was trying to become Dawn. But Dawn was still missing. Joe saw things being thrown out from the house. Not just trash, Dawn's belongings. Her clothes. Her makeup. As if she had been erased. Her friends, growing restless and frightened, finally reported her missing. David's story remained the same, an argument, a designer Louis Vuitton bag, and Dawn walking away from it all. But in a place like Lomita, that story had holes. Dawn wouldn't take a city bus. She wouldn't leave her luxury car behind. And she wouldn't go anywhere without telling someone, especially not with $1,000 of her money still with Joe. Police began to dig. That's when they uncovered David's past. He was more than a charming restaurant owner. He was a man with connections. Before the restaurant flourished, he had built another empire, one of weed distribution. It wasn't small scale. He supplied to local dealers and made a name for himself in the underground world. In 2005, he had been arrested. Drug trafficking. Not his first time either. He had a record going back to 1993. But David was slippery, he turned informant. He gave up names. Big names. Helped dismantle an entire network. In exchange, he served only a year behind bars. He got out. Got married. Moved to a quiet town with a woman who loved him. They opened a new chapter. But some chapters aren't written in ink, they're stained in blood. By late 2009, Dawn had disappeared. Jackie, David's 19-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, had moved in to help at the restaurant. She became the glue holding the business together. Meanwhile, Katie was weaving herself deeper into David's life, playing the role of the future Mrs. David. Jackie watched. She listened. She noticed her father's lies. Then one day, she asked him. Blunt. Honest. Unforgiving. What happened to Dawn? David paused. Then came the confession. He told his daughter he had killed her, accidentally. He begged her to stay quiet. To not call the police. Jackie, paralyzed by fear, agreed. But the truth had already begun to rot beneath the surface. The police sensed it too. David's calm was too calculated. Suspicion gave way to surveillance. In a twisted attempt to throw them off, David asked Katie to use Dawn's phone to send fake messages to friends and family. Pretend everything was normal. Pretend Dawn was alive. But Katie made a mistake. Dawn had always signed her texts with Pixie. Katie, unfamiliar with the habit, misspelled it. The police knew something wasn't right. They obtained a search warrant. Inside the house, traces of blood were found. Bedroom. Hallway. Not fresh. Clean. Faint smears like ghosts on the wall. But without a body, without clear evidence, it wasn't enough. 16 months passed. A year and a half of whispers and shadows. The reporters kept the story alive, their cameras capturing David's increasingly unsteady behavior. One day, a reporter, bold, maybe reckless, walked into David's restaurant and claimed loudly that the entire house was soaked in blood. It wasn't true. But the bluff worked. David panicked. Threw the man out. The pressure mounted. The police returned to Jackie. This time, she broke. The weight of her silence had become unbearable. She confessed. Everything. She also warned her father. The moment the media got wind of it, the town erupted. On February 23, 2011, the story broke. David felt the walls closing in. He turned to Katie, the woman who now wore his ring, and told her the truth. It had been an accident, he insisted. He didn't want to go to prison. He couldn't. I'd rather die, he said. He ran to his car. Katie, confused but calm, followed. She didn't believe he would actually do it. They drove to the cliffs, wind howling like an omen. The sea below waited. Cold. Merciless. He asked her to stay in the car. Then, he jumped. The fall should have killed him. 25 meters down. Rocks. Water. Bone-breaking force. But fate, cruel and cunning, let him live. Broken, battered, David was airlifted from the cliffside. From his hospital bed, wrapped in casts and bandages, he told the police everything. He said it had started as an argument. Dawn was drinking. She wouldn't stop. He grabbed her. She fell. Hit her head. It was an accident. He panicked. Buried her. Erased her. But there was no body. No proof. Only words. Hollow, horrifying words. Even in confession, the mystery remained, where was Dawn? And in Lomita, the wind still whispered her name. David had grown used to silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the type that hung in the air like a curse, thick and oppressive. The walls of the house had soaked up every scream, every slammed door, every broken promise. Dawn, his wife of nearly 2 decades, wasn't the same woman he had married. He remembered her laughter once, warm, spontaneous, intoxicating. Now, it was buried under the weight of liquor bottles and powder lines. Her habits had warped her smile into a sneer, her love into violence. It was another late night. David had just clocked his 90th hour of work that week, the restaurant taking every ounce of his energy. His eyes ached from exhaustion, but his mind was sharp enough to expect what was coming. Dawn wasn't home yet, and that only meant one thing: she was out, floating between bars or strangers, lost in the chemical fog she called freedom. He locked the bedroom door. Not out of spite, but to survive. He needed sleep, if only for a few hours. Sometime past midnight, the doorknob rattled. Her voice slithered through the cracks, venomous and slurred. He told her, gently at first, to sleep in the guest room. He couldn't do this again tonight. The knob shook harder. Then came the crash, wood splintering, the lock snapping under her rage. She came at him like a storm, fists flying, her eyes wild with the mixture of pills and vodka. He didn't hit her. He never did. He backed away, tried to calm her. But she wasn't there anymore. Dawn was somewhere else, somewhere dark. She retreated to the living room in a frenzy. He followed. There on the table lay her stash, tiny plastic bags, rolled bills, half-empty bottles. Disgust and despair mixed in his chest. He snatched the substances and dumped them in the sink, watching them vanish like his hope for their future. Dawn screamed. She lunged. Something sharp flew past his cheek. A glass maybe. He panicked. He reached for the table tape, something he had done before when her psychosis consumed her. He wrapped her wrists, gently but firmly, more to stop her than to hurt her. She thrashed, cursed, tried to bite. He bound her mouth too, not tightly, just enough to quiet the madness, just enough to keep her from hurting herself or him. Then he left her on the couch, still breathing, still fighting the demons in her bloodstream. He needed rest. He collapsed into bed and slept like the dead. The morning sun crept into the room, but David didn't stir until past 9. Groggy, he reached for her side of the bed, empty. That's when it hit him. He ran downstairs. The air was still. Too still. Her body lay cold on the floor. Eyes open. Skin pale. Silent. Time cracked. He dropped to his knees, trembling. Guilt and terror strangled him. He peeled the tape from her mouth. Her lips were blue. She had vomited in the night, and with her mouth sealed, she had no way to survive. A mistake. A horrific mistake. David wept. Then he froze. He saw bars, trials, headlines. The shame. The prison. He imagined himself caged, judged not for love or failure, but for murder. Something inside him, dark, primal, told him to run from the consequences. The restaurant was closed that day. He wrapped her in towels, placed her in the car, drove through the back entrance. In the kitchen was a vat they used for large meat cuts. He filled it with water. His hands shook as he placed her inside, The heat rose. Boiling. Bubbling. He couldn't watch. 4 days passed. Pieces were cut. Bagged. Tossed into the dumpster, lost in the restaurant's food waste. The stench of horror blended with the smell of old grease and fish. He told himself no one would notice. And they didn't. Staff remembered nothing. The cameras were always too old, always somehow not working. The police came weeks later. He told his story eventually, through sobs, through rage, through hopelessness. He sat in a wheelchair now, not from age, but from years of self-destruction. Drugs didn't just destroy Dawn. They had gnawed on him too. Still, no one believed him. His calmness unsettled the courtroom. His eyes, hollow yet steady, became the face of a monster. Prosecutors said it was all premeditated. That he killed her over $200 stolen from the register. That he boiled her flesh because he was cold-blooded. David laughed bitterly at that. After 17 years with her, money was the least of his worries. But who would believe him? They said Dawn had been planning to leave. That she had stashed cash, confided in friends. Maybe she had. Maybe she never planned to make it to tomorrow. The jury took 5 hours. Life in prison. Eligible for parole in 2023. He's still waiting. The dump was searched. Nothing found. No bones. No trace. He once whispered to an officer that her skull and jaw were hidden in his mother's attic. They found nothing there either. Maybe it was a lie. Maybe not. And just when the shadows of this case were beginning to settle, another story crawled out from the cracks of fate. Thousands of miles away, in Greece, another woman named Rula was fighting her own darkness. Born in 1989, spirited and stubborn, she had a smile that charmed but eyes that hid storms. Her sister, younger by 8 years, remembered Rula as mischievous, curious, always running barefoot through trouble. She tried nursing school. Failed. Tried retail. Failed. But on the football field, she found control. That's where she met Manos, a goalkeeper with a future. She was older, wild, radiant. He was smitten. They married despite the whispers, despite his parents' objections. Their daughter Georgina was born soon after. A second girl came in 2015. But beneath the baby photos and family trips, shadows grew long. Arguments. Depression. Suicide attempts. Rula was unraveling. Then, the nightmare. April 13, 2019. Their daughter Molina, 3.5 years old, was in the hospital. A rare leukemia diagnosis had rocked the family, but doctors were hopeful. The child was recovering. She smiled, laughed, ate her favorite food. Then Manos left the room. Rula stayed. 10 minutes after a nurse administered routine meds, the girl convulsed. Her tiny body shook. Her eyes rolled back. She was gone before they could even call for help. Just like that. Gone. Manos came back to avoid. Rula's expression was unreadable. Her tears too delayed. One death could be fate. But more were coming. And Rula, beautiful, broken Rula, was always the last to see them alive. The room had been filled with a strange stillness, the kind that crawled under your skin and whispered that something wasn't right. Rula's voice broke through the silence, ragged and trembling, as she cried out for her daughter. Molina lay on the bed, her breaths shallow and erratic, her small chest rising and falling in desperate, wheezing gasps. And then the seizure began, violent, unforgiving, twisting her tiny frame in a way no mother should ever witness. Rula shouted again, louder this time, panic scraping her throat raw, but her daughter didn't respond. She tore herself from the bedside and sprinted through the sterile corridor, her bare feet slapping against the cold tile, summoning the nurses with wide, fear-soaked eyes. They came running, but by the time they reached Molina, the fight was over. Her body had gone still, her face pale, her lips tinged a quiet blue. Later, the cold language of the forensic report would state the cause of death: liver failure and pulmonary edema. Clinical. Clean. Final. But grief doesn't care for neat conclusions. The air in the Pespigo home hung heavy with sorrow. Every photograph of Molina became a wound, every echo of her laughter a haunting. Somehow, in the thick of that grief, Rolla and Manos found each other again. Maybe it was the shared ache that stitched their bond back together. By 2021, they were whole once more, or so it seemed. A third child was born, a baby girl they named Irida. She brought light back into their lives. There were smiles again, cautious ones, but real. For a while, they believed they had outrun the darkness. But darkness doesn't like to be outrun. 6 months after Irida's birth, Rolla woke to stillness again. It was March, and the chill of the morning had settled over everything. That night, Rolla had been alone with her baby. Her sister, Ditra, hadn't stayed over. Around 7:30 a.m., Irida stirred. Rolla offered her a pacifier, and both drifted again into the fragile quiet of early sleep. But by 11 a.m., that quiet had turned unnatural. When Rolla checked on her baby, the color was gone from her face. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. Panic twisted her insides. She screamed for Manos on the phone and pressed her hands against the baby's chest, trying to remember how to do CPR. Her fingers were trembling, her breaths shallow, just like Molina's had been. Minutes ticked by like hours. Still no ambulance call. Still no help. Just desperation and disbelief. Finally, an hour later, the call was made. But it was too late. The paramedics arrived and confirmed what Rolla already feared: the baby was gone, her tiny body already beginning to cool, the softness of her skin stiffening. The official cause of death made no sense. Sinus node dysplasia. Heart cell degeneration. A condition almost never seen in infants. Doctors called it congenital, rare, freakish. But the questions began to swirl, quiet at first, like wind beneath a door. Why the delay in calling for help? Why call Manos first? Could that hour have saved her? Rolla said she was in shock. Said her mind froze. But some wondered if there was something more. After all, this was the second daughter lost, and just like Molina, Irida had seemed perfectly healthy until, suddenly, she wasn't. Now there was only Georgina, the eldest. She was all they had left. But not even she would escape untouched. 15 days after burying Irida, Georgina collapsed, her body racked with convulsions. The hospital fought hard to pull her back. And they did, barely. They placed a pacemaker, a defibrillator. They monitored every breath, every heartbeat. But the seizures continued, and no one knew why. She was diagnosed with encephalopathy. But that, too, was just a name, no one could say what caused it. Georgina would be hospitalized again and again, as if her body was struggling to hold on, as if her spirit was already too close to whatever waited beyond. In January 2022, the transfer was arranged. A new clinic, better monitoring, fresh hope. But it never came. On January 29th, 9-year-old Georgina took her last breath. The doctors were still fighting when Rolla told them to stop. She stepped forward, calm, eyes dry. "She's gone," she said. "Let her go." Her voice was cold. Hollow. The room fell silent. No one moved. The machines kept beeping until they were silenced too. She looked at her daughter, her last child, and said she had endured enough pain. That it was time to rest. Later that same day, Rolla posted on social media. She wrote of love. Of loss. Of how Georgina had brought her joy and strength. Of how she hoped her daughter would now be reunited with her sisters. She said she would carry her memory forever. She even got tattoos for each of them, first Melina, then Irida, now Georgina. Symbols inked into her skin like scars that would never heal. But the whispers only grew louder. 3 daughters. Dead in 3 years. Each one falling to a different medical mystery. Each one slipping away despite promising signs of recovery. Something wasn't right. The doctors began to murmur amongst themselves. Investigators were called. Georgina's records were pulled. Interviews conducted. 20 doctors across 5 hospitals, Athens, Patras, all asked the same questions. Why did a seemingly healthy child die so suddenly? Why did Rola insist she had heart issues when the test said otherwise? Why did she claim seizures when no signs were ever found? Instead of heart failure, Georgina had been diagnosed with psychological distress, trauma from the deaths of her sisters. Her suffering was real, but not the kind measured on monitors or cured with machines. And yet, she was readmitted. She kept returning. Seizures. Unexplained pain. And then, death. One moment, she was speaking to the doctors, telling them she felt like a bomb was ticking inside her, ready to explode. The next, she was gone. No ghosts were seen. No curses carved into the walls. But something clung to the Pespigo family like mold in the walls of an old house, quiet, suffocating, and hard to prove. Some whispered of witchcraft, a bloodline curse. Others spoke of something even darker, hidden behind the soft smiles and tearful posts, a mask, maybe, stretched too tight. But one thing was certain, wherever Rola went, death followed. 3 daughters. 3 tragedies. And far too many unanswered questions.